Of personal privilege.
The delegate from Alexandria, Delegate Levine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, as the longest federal government shutdown enters its 25th day today, I send messages out to my constituents to find out how it affected them. There's some 20,000 people in Alexandria that work for the federal government, although I well recognize that of the 800,000 people that are being furloughed or sent home or being forced to work without pay, a lot of them live in rural areas. There's a lot of suffering in rural areas, particularly among farmers who need the USDA, and I'll leave it to another delegate to talk about that. But this is going to be a big harm to the Virginia economy. Sequestration really harmed us. If this shutdown continues, it'll harm us even more. But really what drew my eye were the personal stories of the people who wrote me. There was Andrea Arias. She went to very good schools, University of Pennsylvania, Emory Law School, could have had a lucrative career in the private sector. Instead, she joined the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission. Now she has to apply for unemployment. She needs help on her mortgage. She's seriously considering leaving the federal government to work in the private sector. And given that she's pregnant with her second child, who can blame her? The saddest part, she writes, quote, is that my mother-in-law passed away in December, and we have not been able to travel down to Florida to spread her ashes because our finances are so tight. Then there's Sabrina Keyser. She's not a government employment or contractor. Her roommate is. He was laid off from his firm, which does contract work, and she has to pay more in energy and heating bills. And he's going to have to leave. She has to pay one more month of rent. She has to find a new roommate. She also works for the Salvation Army, which generally gets reimbursed for services for addiction and for beds. Now they're not going to be able to serve people in need of addiction services who are in need of beds. It's not just the Salvation Army. Sexual and domestic violence agencies, because of the lack of federal funds, are being cut. 10 to 20% salary reductions in Alexandria. In Newport News, they're actually closing the office for victims in need. Then we have Kenna Howitt. She's a federal contractor working for the DEA Museum, was excited to be able to pay off $70,000 in student loans. Now she's lost over $5,000, is going to have to return to her weekend jobs. There's Jose Fusa. He is an Iraq War veteran from the Air Force. He's an employee at the IRS, married with 2 kids. His wages support the family. He's struggling with his mortgage, 2 car payments, and basic living expenses. Tristan is the founder of Lost Boy Cider. He's a small business owner. He was applying to open his cidery in Old Town this spring. His permits are tied up with TTB. He's been working for 2 years to make this happen. His house is tied up on the loan. He has 3 kids. He has a landlord who expects to pay him. And he says while cider on the world scale of importance doesn't place in the top 10, the reality of this shutdown and its adverse effect upon us before we launch is scary to understand. But finally, the one that I guess touched my heart the most was Melanie Trombley. Her son works for the United States Coast Guard. He's 4 years in. He's stationed in Kodiak, Alaska until 2021. Her husband works for the Border Patrol. 12 years in, he works actually up in Vermont, where actually our northern border is being insecure. They're essential. They're both working without pay. Her son has an average salary of $30,000 a year before taxes. My husband and I, she writes, will be able to pay our mortgage and bills for the next 2 months as long as we don't eat or buy gas. Kind of hard to go to work where there is no gas. Our bank is not allowing a deferment of our mortgage, has charged us a penalty for deferring our 2 personal loans. We can pay that penalty again next month, but the money is lost and not applied. Basically, the bank is making money off our misfortune. The worst part of all of this is my son is 4,600 miles from home, and we don't have the means to support 2 households. I'll tell you this, I will lose everything I have before my son and daughter-in-law go hungry. I can't believe our family has been put in this situation to have to choose. We are not even the hardest hit. Whatever you think about the differences in Congress, whatever you think in the federal government between them and the president, it is not these people's fault. They are suffering through no fault of their own. They are doing important missions, the important things. We depend on the Coast Guard. We depend on the Food and Drug Administration to keep our drugs safe, our food safe. We depend on the federal government every day. We fly. We use the TSA. Things are going to hit in Virginia pretty hard. We may run out of food for food stamps. We may run out of money to protect victims of domestic violence. I hope when that happens that the people in this body will step up to the plate and fill in for our constituents, for Virginians, where the federal government fails. Thank you for your time.